Está bien, y yo también me pongo aquí.
¿Cómo estás?
¿Qué tal?
¿Cómo estás?
Aquí bien.
¿Hace tiempo que estás jugando?
Bastante. Pasa bien.
Hombre, muy buenas. ¿Y tú qué tal estás?
Pues...
¿Y quién gana?
El que no pierde.
El que no pierde.
Ganamos los dos.
Bueno, suerte.
Pasamos
Sí.
el tiempo.
Adiós.
Adiós. Hasta luego.
Estás perdiendo una mujer extraordinaria, una mujer que de verdad te ama.
Sí, Diana, ya lo sé. Es una mujer que me ama, que me respeta, que me mundo a través de mis ojos.
И вдруг началась война. Ritorno. Боевые действия.
Suddenly, a war broke out. The fighting flared up in San Sebastian, one of the first cities in Spain. Apparently, Franco planned it that way. Since it was a resort, workers would make up only a small fraction of its inhabitants, and they would not fight back very fiercely. Indeed, just a few days later, my mother and father, and my sisters and I were evacuated to Bilbao.
Эвакуировались в Билбао. Поскольку мой папа был из...
Insofar as my dad was in the UK Tea Party, it was the Workers' General Union, he was the first one to sign up and the first to leave for the Soviet Union as well.
Для того, чтобы поехать в Советский Союз. А ведь тогда что говорили?
They were saying then that we could go to school, or at least we would be free from the bombing. Just a few days later, my mother saw us to the train. The parents and children all gathered round, all dressed up in their holiday outfits. In a way, you know, it wasn't ominous, but quite the opposite. Everyone was happy because they were dressed up in their Sunday best. But when we got on the train, everyone started crying, especially my parents. My sister, who was 3 years older than me, also burst into tears, and I just couldn't understand. The Spanish steamship dropped us off in France. It was a French seaport, I don't remember where exactly. I wasn't interested in names then, and I don't know how to say it. They didn't feed us. I remember once someone came down the gangway and shouted, "They're giving out soup," and everybody ran off. Actually, all the older children ran, but we stayed below deck. Once when we were sailing on the North Sea, somebody yelled out, "Germans!" And on the left side of the boat, we saw 2 cruisers. They just sat there in the water, unmoving. I don't know how the others felt, but there was complete silence. You know, that kind of silence. And we waited. Would they make a stab at us or not? You know, it was harrowing. This fear spread among all of us. Well, apparently we pushed on further, and that's really all I remember.
So, Carmen Gonzalez. Well, young lady, you've got yourself into heaven.
Niños llegaron aquí casi todos en el 36.
The children, almost all of them, were brought here in 1936, but my mother and I got here in 1939. When we were in France, my brother had passed away, and my mother and I relocated to Leningrad, as it was called then. After that, we moved to Moscow, where we lived in a sanitarium on the outskirts of the city. Later, my father joined us there.
My mother stayed alone in Barcelona, and from there she somehow managed to hitchhike with her 2 children to France. Meanwhile, her brother, Justo Lopez, did the same thing my father did, took the same route to get to France. Sometime later, when they were already in those camps, they were allowed to choose between 2 or 3 countries to move to. My father said that he was given the choice of moving to either Mexico or to the Soviet Union. I think Uncle Justo was offered the same choice. That's how they turned up here, because my uncle was a dedicated communist. To him, the Soviet Union was a beacon in the dark. He had long dreamed of coming here. And once he arrived, he approached the Red Cross and asked them to search for his sister. She was found in France, and they offered to bring her to the Soviet Union. That's how she and her children ended up here. When she got here, she stayed with my brother, of course, and he introduced her to my father. So that's how their love began, their romance.
As I recall, the sun was bright when we arrived in Leningrad. And there were hordes of people there on the dock, all waving their hands and shouting. We obviously couldn't understand anything they were saying. We expected that they would take us down the gangway, but instead we were told to go to sleep. Why would we sleep when it's light out? I mean, the sun was low, but it was still bright. We didn't understand that it didn't get dark there in June. When we were coming down the gangway, it was something like a corridor among the countless faces of men in white shirts, pioneers, or maybe members of the Komsomol. I'm not sure who they were, but they held hands and tried not to let anyone come through. However, there were some who managed to burst through the line. One girl, who was about 14 or 15, forced her way through and started kissing me all over, again and again, but they pushed her back out. As she was going, she held her doll out to me, and at that moment, it seemed so stunning.
Y otra cosa que hay que reconocer que Rusia entonces estaba en una situación horrorosa.
There was a lot of hardship in Russia at that time. It was during World War II. But even though the Spanish children had all been evacuated to Central Asia, it shouldn't be forgotten that they were all getting both bread and sugar, and all their needs were met. Classes at our school were even held in both Spanish and Russian, Of course, we are very grateful to the Soviet Union for this.
Al gobierno.
Как только началась война, начались...
Our troubles began just as soon as the war broke out. We arrived at the Volga region, but all the Germans there had already been sent to Siberia. On the ship, we had been warned that we were moving to a place where Germans lived, and that we shouldn't dare to drink from a well or take anything from their places. This was because before they left, they had supposedly poisoned everything. Once we arrived, a woman came up to us, and speaking in her own language, she started serving us pies with some sort of filling. We certainly couldn't understand anything she was saying, but we did understand that it was a treat. Naturally, one of the girls among us started saying, "Don't touch them, they're poisoned." I asked her, how could they be poisoned when they were prepared especially for us on the road? What's wrong with you? There were a few more families left, and they moved into a very old barge. Everyone cried. But what distressed us the most was the dogs. They were constantly howling. They would howl every time the barge moved, howling all night, searching for their masters. There were a lot of hens left, wandering about, and cows strolling around by themselves. This helped us a lot. Our director immediately appropriated 6 cows for himself, although he probably asked permission first. At that time, in my opinion, communists didn't do anything without permission. This is what rescued us, because the sick children were given this milk to drink. Well, this was the most severe winter we spent in the Volga region.
When the war began, all the young Spaniards wanted to join the lines at the front, including my father. He went to a recruiting office, a place where soldiers were mobilized and sent as units. But their lack of language undid them. They couldn't even understand it. If they had fallen prisoner, it would have been immediately clear. Consequently, there was a pronouncement, a centralized one, from Moscow, that all Spaniards were to return. So like the others, my father returned and spent the war at the children's asylum. When the asylums were evacuated, our family followed the same route as everyone else. In 1942, they lived near Stalingrad, where my brother Jose was born. Then there was a famine in Ufa, and my father told me that Jose almost died of hunger. Later, at the end of the war, they arrived in Yevpatoria, where I was born. And there, they worked like Stahanovci. You see, there was a man, Stahanov, who did 2, 3, even 4 times the normal amount of work in a day. My parents worked like that, night and day. They had to feed the family. There were already 4 children, and there was no chance to get out of Yevpatoria, the Crimea, where we lived. Then my mother decided to take control of her fate. She wrote a letter to Dolores Ibarruri, telling her about our awful situation, how we were starving. She also wrote to the Central Committee, and they answered her with an invitation. So we children were sent to an international children's asylum in Ivanovo.
If I remember correctly, in May of 1945, there was a day of victory, when a senior on the floor of the hostel came to see us at 3 o'clock in the morning. He woke us up shouting, "Girls, victory, victory!" We all got up in our beds, almost naked, and started jumping and throwing pillows around. We'll finally go back to Spain. At last, we'll go back to Spain.
A club had been established where we would gather and traditions had already developed. In the summer, excursions were arranged to go there. This practice was referred to as gira, and all the Spanish immigrants would make a trek to the country. They used to be well organised, travelling by bus. I think that the Spaniards probably didn't do this all by themselves, but they were probably supported by the Soviet authorities. In the countryside, we relaxed together. We improvised bullfights. There was Spanish food, Spanish songs and dances. There were rest houses. Even when I was studying at the institute, it already seemed that so many years had passed, but there were still some opportunities. The Spanish children would go to summer camps together. That's to say, they did everything they could to help us not lose our connections with one another, to help us live as a community.
Помочь нам жить как бы вместе.
Almost all Spaniards lived with the idea that we would leave very soon. My daddy would say, "We have all our things packed and we're waiting for the moment to leave. We'll leave very soon. Listen, Franco will die." Actually, he didn't die for a long time, but we were all waiting, thinking, soon he will die, soon, and we'll go. Because of this, many of us tried to keep from starting families. As soon as I got married, I understood that I was going to spend my whole life here. I was still young, I had friends here, I had an interesting job. We were all young, even my parents were quite young. When they left, of course, we cried, but my mother asked me, "Luba, why are you so worried? In the Soviet Union, there are families where children live in Sakhalin, and the parents live in Belarus. We're better off than they are. Anytime we want, you can fly here and visit us."
When I came to Spain the first time, my sister reminisced with me about Russia. Whenever we sang Pod Moskovnaya Vechera, everything was okay. We would sing
Солнечный круг, небо вокруг, это рисунок мальчишки. Нарисовал он на листе и подписал в уголке. Пусть всегда будет солнце, пусть всегда будет небо, пусть всегда будет мама, пусть всегда буду я. И знаете, у меня тут что-то так схватило.
And you know, something just grabbed me. I wanted to cry. I wanted to go home right away.
Хотела свернуть скорее, да?
Pensaba siempre que cuando estuviera en España todas mis penas desaparecerían.
I always thought that when I got to Spain, my personal problems would disappear by themselves, but it didn't turn out that way. Once here in Barcelona, I ran away from the hotel and walked around this beautiful ancient street until I ended up near a cathedral. The door was open. I went inside. Suddenly, I saw a huge portrait of Saint Gemma Galgani, and then something happened, something difficult to describe in words. Basically, I left that temple as a completely different person.
So you went inside the church, sat down?
Yes, no one was there.
How long did you stay there?
I can't say exactly. I don't remember.
And you spoke with the Lord?
I can't put it into words. It's difficult to talk about it. Something happened in my soul, and I realized the exact transformation that I had wanted for so long, searched for so long without finding. Since then, every time I go back to Spain, I go to pray to Saint Gemma. It seems to me that she recognizes me, that she expects me. In Spain, she is loved dearly, and they lovingly refer to her as the golden-haired fairy.
In 1967, when I went to see my mother, we met in Bordeaux, where my sister lives. When my mother saw me, she cried and repeated over and over, "He's forgiven me, he has forgiven me." And I asked her, who? Actually, at that point, I had lost my faith. And my mother said, "God has forgiven me." All my neighbors told me, "There you go, you communists have shipped your children off to Russia, and now you'll never see them again." At first I was a little offended that she wasn't as happy to see me as she was that God had forgiven her. But later I realized I was just being silly.
I didn't find out until my mother's funeral. Honestly, she never told me that I hadn't been baptized when I was a child. And here, I've lived my whole life thinking that I'm baptized, walking around with a peaceful soul in church, not a single worry. My mother wanted to tell me something before her death. She just kept repeating, "Dear Carmen, my child," but she decided not to say anything about it. But when I went to the funeral in Spain, my aunts came and decided to tell me the truth.
When
I used to visit my parents in Spain, I would stay with them in Madrid, even though my mother was a devout atheist. Young Christian girls used to visit her. Then these women from Caritas would come too. They paid her visits quite often. Mama loved meeting with them, and I came to understand that this was a unique place where they could really, yes, freely, without expecting anything from me. I mean, I can come here and ask for anything, and they will help me. So I have my heart open for them, you know? I realize that this is mine. But it's important to know that this didn't happen just at that moment. It had always been part of me. Because even when I was still a little girl, I remember when we lived in Yevpatoria and I went to a kindergarten, which was quite far away, there was a church that I often went to. I loved going there. And to this day, I remember the experience so vividly. It was so full of peace and harmony.
Living here, I've completely lost my faith.
Faith doesn't just come from nowhere. It's passed down through the years from generation to generation. I think that even those years when religion was forbidden in Russia, when children of believers weren't allowed to be in the pioneers or in Komsomol, and they had no prospects, even at that time there were churches and faith. I want to say that even if religion is forbidden, even if a person doesn't go to church, faith still lives in his soul.
Este es Jesucristo. felices los invitados a la cena del Señor.
Señor, no soy digno de que entres en mi casa, pero una palabra tuya bastará para sanar.
El cuerpo de Cristo. Padre, Hijo y Espíritu Santo, descienda sobre vosotros. Puedes ir en paz y felicitaciones.
But has he performed any miracles for you?
Well, it seems to me that my whole life is a miracle.
Jesucito de mi vida, tú eres niño como yo.
И 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, считаем.